Hey everyone, John Henry here, slingshotfutures.com, and welcome to the daily market outlook for futures and forex, where we take a look at our big six markets. Now, the main goal of the outlook is to create a plan for tomorrow so that we can be as prepared as possible for tomorrow's price action. So jumping into the futures market, first off, we have gold. Now, pretty much the common scenario that we've had today is a range. We've been bouncing all over the place, back and forth, lots and lots of just kind of confusion. We can see here that every time there was a nice move down, there was an equal move up. And when there was an equal move down, there was an equal move up. Lots of back and forth. So whenever we're in a range, we're looking to buy low and we're looking to sell high. Now, generally speaking, it's always good to have a bias on a trade. So if we zoom way out, we can see that the overall bias on gold would be bearish. We would rather be sellers than we would rather be buyers. But that being said, we've been in this kind of consolidation for so long now that it might not really matter. So looking to sell with a slight edge versus the buying. But what we're getting right now is we're getting an attempted breakdown from the sellers underneath support of 71.6 to 70.9. And it's not doing so well, right? The sellers had a chance to get the breakout pullback, which tried, and now we're back again. So if we see the buyers push through this level, there's a very good chance that maybe we don't get all the way back up to 77.9 to 76.2, but there's a good chance that we at least pop back up into the 74 area, about halfway into the range, provided that we stay above this low. Now, all things considered, because we are looking to buy low and we're looking to sell high, if the market can dip down to the lows, that low at 68.1 is going to be an absolute hotbed of potential orders. There's a huge amount of inventory down here. The buyers who have been buying into this, their stops are going to be directly underneath that, and sellers may even be looking to take a breakdown of that level for a stop run just for a quick move. So there are going to be a lot of orders that hit underneath this, with the majority of them probably being buy orders unless something drastic changes in the overnight session for buyers fading into the move back up. So right now we're at the lows. I'm looking to be a buyer and drive the market back up towards the highs with an intermediary target of, around 73.5 to 74 in that area first, and then the big objective back up towards that top. Looking over at crude oil, kind of the same scenario, a slight more downward bias, but again, we're really just kind of range bound. If we show where we opened up to where we're closing, roughly, right, because we're not closed yet, but where we're closing, we just have a huge doji on a daily chart, right? Big wick on the bottom, big wick on the top. We're just finding balance here, and the buyers and sellers are fighting over who controls the market. Again, the bears do have a better argument in their area of resistance, at which we just cycled off of not too long ago, between 5107 to 5098. The major objective for the sellers right now would then be to get a move back down to the lows into that 5038 to 28 area before we start finding some support. It did appear as though the buyers were trying to get some form of a pennant, with a breakout and continuation, but it completely fell apart. A lot of times when it falls apart like that, you're looking for the market to come back to an obvious swing low area, which right now is at 5060, and then see what they want to do. If this is going to be a continued breakout, it should push underneath it, find it as resistance, and then finish the job off. If the sellers are going to start running into trouble, that's where they're going to do it. Right? There are going to be a lot of buyers that are trying to cycle in, trying to buy a low, trap low, etc., to find the low of a range and push the market back up. I would much rather be a seller right now. We're just very low into the move. I would rather look for at least a little bit of a correction first and then look to sell it back down to that 5038 to 28 area underneath. And then finally, for the futures market, we have the Dow, another very range-bound environment here. Today, as we can see, not really a whole lot going on. We just ended with a very nice bull move up, quick little snapback, and a new high. And we are now breaking above that area of resistance between 19,233 and 228. And this is the area where if the sellers are going to take it for long-term moves back to the lows, this is where they're going to be doing it. Now, they may try to get another leg towards the upside. If they do, you do have these two major swings from yesterday with that lower high failure, and that would be up at 265 to 276. But as long as we stay underneath that, there's a good chance that we find a huge amount of sellers up here at the end of the the day to try to get a move back down to the lows in the overnight session. This is another one of those situations where we may not get a cycle all the way down to the lows. We have a wedge going into the end of the day. We're getting a breakout to the top side in an otherwise not real much of a bias here. There is a slight bullish bias, I suppose. So that being said, we're getting a bull breakout in an already bullish environment, for lack of better words. That doesn't usually stick around a whole lot, you know. So right now what I would much rather see is selling opportunities up here to drive the market back down. We have support at the first swing low after this big burst, or the major swing low of the pennant or the wedge. Either way though, those two areas are going to be the major targets for selling here to go back down, and if it wants to continue, then you're looking for the next objective back to the range lows. So that does it for the futures market. Let's take a look at the Forex markets. Now, the Euro-USD had a fairly range-bound start, but it really kicked off to the downside and got going here. So we had a big correction up early this morning, about 2 o'clock or so, and it never came back. We all selling pressure all the way down with a huge breakout in between. Now, with that breakdown, looking for further continuation, we do have the likelihood of sellers wanting to try to continue, but we ran into a little bit of a problem. The sellers got a little too much juice in the tank, and it looks like it's a slightly overdone. A lot of times when you have a channel or a bear or anything pointing to the downside and it breaks lower, it doesn't stick around very often. It's unsustainable movement. If it does stay around, it's usually going to be very obvious with a huge secondary leg to it. In this case, we're not getting that. We're just getting a wedge pullback. So what I'm looking for right now is short-term buying opportunities to push the market back up to equidistance breakout from the downside to the top side, right? So if we take that box, which we drew from the breakout point to the lowest area, watch it cycle back. Once we hit the top of it, look for a breakout of about that distance. Now you'll notice if we get to it around where the box is drawn, that would put you at a trap swing high right around those two areas, and that could lead to a lot of sellers jumping in to attempt to drive the market back down to the lows. The big area of confluence right now, 1.07228. That is the double bottom that we just broke out of, and now we're migrating our way back up towards it. So be careful around this level and look for that possible equidistance breakout if we can get to the highs of that wedge. The pound dollar, big drop off of the highs. Absolutely ridiculous amount of selling on the pound dollar. So much so that it almost got unsustainable down here. And this is the type of correction that we're talking about. It gets unsustainable on one side. We have a bear channel that's breaking lower. That doesn't tend to stick around very long. It's correcting. We're now getting a correction back, and this is the area that the sellers are going to look to pile drive this lower. We do have some really big targets to the downside if the pound dollar does decide to let loose. The first objective, 26,397. The second objective, 26,293. And the big boy, if it really wants to go for a run, we're looking for 25,964 to the downside. So there is a huge amount of openness for the bears to go in on. The sellers have a wide open door. Now they just have to try to take it towards that sell side and get that move going. And then finally, we're looking at the dollar-yen. Now, the dollar-yen, unfortunately, we didn't have any kind of movement like we saw yesterday. Yesterday was nice and easy, gave us some beautiful opportunities. Today, a little bit more range-bound. We got kind of nasty in here on the dollar-yen, and lots of back and forth. Now, you will notice that it does appear as though we're forming a slight intermediary low down here, along with a possible, it's got a range bias for sure. Really, what we're kind of keeping our eye on is, do they want to tighten the range up to be something like this, or do they want to expand it back down to the overall range lows down around 113,585 to 501. If they are going to hold this smaller one, that would be a range that's tightening in on itself, and you can think of that as kind of like a spring that you're crunching down on itself, right? It's coiling, and eventually it can't coil anymore, and you get a big breakout in one direction. So if they do end up holding inside of this, be careful, because we might end up getting a pretty big breakout in one direction or another. Overall, though, we do have a range sentiment, so looking to sell a high, looking to buy a low. We haven't really come back to the lows, so one thing that kind of stands out here is a possibility of rising support. These two lows right here have been holding pretty darn well on the way up, and the sellers really aren't getting a whole lot done. The buyers are holding higher lows, But the sellers, they're not really holding the lower highs. We do have a couple more recent ones, but even those are breaking out. So if anything, the buyers have a slightly better argument than do the sellers, but we're still in a range looking to buy low, looking to sell high. So that's going to do it for this one. It might be kind of an interesting one. I'm really hoping that tomorrow doesn't end up like today, where we just stay in a range and we don't go anywhere. But if we do, just make sure to make that plan, trade the plan, stick to that plan, and you'll be just fine. So have a good one, everyone, and we will see you all tomorrow.